Today I'm very pleased to be able to speak with Jim Rogers, the legendary commodities investor and the founder of the Rogers International Commodities Index here in his home. Jim, thank you very much for joining us in the banking conversation. Tell us a little bit about Jim Rogers and commodities. How did this whole industry grow on you, and what from your younger days led you to take the positions that you have in the commodities industry today?
Well, ever since I was in the investment business, I've always invested in everything: stocks and bonds, currencies, commodities, both long and short, all around the world. I mean, I started reading the commodities page of the Wall Street Journal when I started reading the Wall Street Journal, because I, for some reason, thought that they'd all fit together. I didn't know it didn't fit together.
Did coming from Alabama have anything to do with that?
Very well, conceivably, yes. I did come from a rural state, and I came from a rural part of the state, so conceivably, yes. Although we were not farmers, my family was not involved with agriculture at all. But for whatever reason, I've always invested in everything, both long and short, and all over the world. And commodities was just another thing. It so happened that by the end of the 90s, I thought I saw commodities bear market that had been going on for 20 years coming to an end, and so I naturally started thinking about investing there and did so. Eventually, this bull market in commodities will come to an end. I hope I'm smart enough to get out of it when it does and go short commodities.
Right. A lot has been talked about Jim Rogers and commodities. Tell us a little bit about the index itself. What's it telling you in terms of how it's weighted, what it should be focused on, and
well, when I started going to go back into commodities on the long side, I thought I'd just become an index investor because everybody knows about index investing, and I was about to go around the world. But I looked at the existing indexes, and they were useless. I mean, I wouldn't put my money into them. So, by necessity, I had to come up with my own index. It was an attempt to show the cost of living around the world, or just to be alive around the world. The others were very U.S.-centric for the most part, but I was interested in the whole world, so I sat down and came up with what I hoped was a way to measure the cost of being alive around the world. Right. And so far, I had to worry about liquidity, obviously, but so far it stood the test of time. I mean, who knew? I didn't know what I was doing.
But did you see the other indices sort of improve themselves as a result of?
Well, yes, some of them have gotten better since then. I mean, the Dow Jones didn't know they had a commodities index when I went to see the head of the Wall Street Journal. It's gotten somewhat better, but I still wouldn't put a penny of my money into it. They still all have serious problems, as far as I'm concerned, as an investor.
Right.
Some of them are good for the...
Why is that? Is it because of the skills in the commodities investment business, or is that just the focus of the different players in the marketplace at the moment, like investment banks? Why don't they have a deeper focus on commodities?
Oh, well, at times they've had huge commitments to commodities. In the 70s, when commodities were hot, most investment banks had large commodities departments. In the 80s and 90s, there was a long bear market in commodities, so most of them got out of the commodities business. They're coming back now because there's a bull market. But that's been the story on Wall Street, the investment community all over the world throughout history for hundreds of years. When something's hot, they go there because they can sell it. If you went to somebody and said, we're going to have a .com fund in 1991, they would say, go away and leave me alone. Mm-hmm. But by 1999, if you went and said, I'm going to have a .com fund, everybody would have kissed your feet because everybody wanted a .com fund. So that's at the top. Always happens at the top that way.
Right.
That's why they'll all be back in the commodities in a big way in 5, 10, 15 years.
Right. Give us a sense of how commodities is likely to play out in the next 5 years. Commodities and inflation. There's a lot of talk today on the possible impact of inflation. Commodities and inflation. What's the correlation and how's that?
Rising prices are inflation by definition, and in my view, we're going to have rising prices of commodities for many reasons. The mainly the supply demand are out of balance. And as those prices go higher, it's going to be called inflation. Plus, we have central banks now printing huge amounts of money all over the world. That, too, has always led to higher prices. So you have this combination now of supply-demand imbalances, compounded by central banks printing huge amounts of money all over the world. So by the end of the bull market, who knows how high the prices will go. That's always been the case with bull markets in any assets, you know. They go along for a while, but by the end, there's hysteria. Everybody's investing in the asset class, whether it's California real estate or tankers or gold, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
In the end, it's wild and hysterical.
How elastic is commodities? Given the fact that it's a base requirement for everyday living, there's a point at which where commodities becomes overpriced and it's not sustainable. The economy can't hold it anymore. So what's your take on kind of a ceiling, against inflation? That'll
be one of the things that will obviously in the bull market. Prices will go so incredibly high that people will not be able to afford them anymore. The demand will cut back. The usage will cut back. In the late 1970s, everybody was wearing a sweater in their homes. They were turning the thermostats down, or if they were, depending on what they were in the tropics, they were turning the thermostats up. Everybody cut back the usage dramatically because prices skyrocketed and went up. It went up over 10 times. That will happen next time too.
And at which time you would be out of the market?
Well, I hope I'm smart enough to get out. Normally in my history, I always get out too soon because I see what's coming. Unfortunately, usually by the time in 1978, the world started producing more oil than it consumed for the first time in a long time. And yet in the next 2 years, oil prices doubled. Even though the fundamentals, because at the end of a bull market, as I say, there's momentum, there's hysteria, people believe the world's going to go on forever. And that's the most dangerous part of a bull market. Or the best part.
And the best part.
Depending on whether you're long or short. But it always happens that way. Now, my problem is I see what's happening, so I get out.
Right.
I wish I was smart enough to stay in for that delicious gravy.
What's that got to do with aging, that you become a little bit more...
No, I was always this way. I always saw, it was going nuts. I mean, that's one of the things I've tried to learn about myself. I have to wait before I act because I'm always too soon.
Right. Commodities and currencies, and especially the U.S. dollar in terms of where it's heading and how that's going to be reflected in commodity prices.
The U.S. dollar is a terribly flawed currency.
Okay.
The U.S. dollar is going to be going into demise over the next 2 or 3 decades for a variety of reasons, many reasons, because it's terribly, terribly flawed. With the largest debtor nation in the world, in the history of the world, is now the United States. That's not good. That the fundamentals will ruin the dollar. Now, the fact that commodities are traded in dollars is a factor with commodities. But 100 years ago, commodities were traded in sterling, the world's reserve currency. Well, that changed. That will change with the dollar too, because the world's going to move away. Many people in the world are already trying to move away from the dollar. They will move away from the dollar. And any correlation between commodities and the dollar, which might exist now, and I don't think much there is, it'll disappear. I mean, there's no correlation between the peseta and the current commodities right now. That'll be the same with the dollar someday.
But what about commodities intensive countries like China and India?
Remember, China and India together, while they have 2.3 billion people, billion with a B, are very small in comparison to the world market. Europe and America combined are something like 10 times as big as India and China combined in their economy. So while India and China are wonderful countries and wonderful things are happening in both, they're very small in the big picture so far. That's changing. We think it's changing, but it's not going to change the world right now.